All right, everyone. I'm gonna lay down some quick ground rules and how this is gonna work today. We want to answer all your questions we can about transaction abandoned campaigns, why they works, what doesn't. So the Q&A is open, so feel free to ask. Everyone can actually see all of your questions as well. So you have the ability to comment on each other's questions or feel free to chime in. We're going to kick things off and start talking through things. And as we go, we're going to answer your questions as we can. Um, and then we've got time at the end for plenty of questions as well. So, welcome to the first Superwall Growth Session. We're going to be talking today about transaction abandoned campaigns, what works, what doesn't. And during these sessions, we're going to show you some insight that we have from working with our customers across millions of paywalls every single year. And in fact, we Superwall serves paywalls to millions of users every week. So you've got lots of data to look at. We're going to get through and show you guys what works and what examples we have for you. Some very tactical things that you can do with transaction abandoned campaigns and uh, run through the whole gauntlet of whatever questions you have afterwards. Cool. So I'm your host. With me is Jake Moore, Superwall CEO, one who started all this with Brian, our CTO, and Jordan Morgan, our developer advocate. Jordan's going to be helping out in the Q&A. He'll be popping in links for support docs or other things that you guys need. Jake and I'll be leading most of the discussion today.
Hi, everybody.
Cool. All right. So here's what we're going to talk through. The surprising user behavior around transaction abandonment that ends up costing developers thousands of conversions. We're going to talk about why users abandon purchases, what causes them to do this, and then how to create and optimize your campaigns in Superwall and what kinds of offers work and what doesn't. So let's talk about this phenomenon of transaction abandonment. It flies under the radar all the time because it's not something that most developers pay attention to, but it happens constantly. So let's talk a little bit about what it is. So a user will view a paywall and they'll tap your CTA. The native Apple purchase sheet will slide up, or the Google Play purchase sheet will slide up. And then a user sees this, hesitates, and then closes it without completing the transaction. This is what we call a transaction abandonment. And we have a specific placement in Superwall just for this. So the SDK automatically triggers a transaction underscore abandon placement when this happens. And if you're sending your analytics to like a mixed panel or amplitude, you should be able to see how frequently this occurs. And you'll also be able to see how frequently this occurs in the Superwall charts as well. I'll show you that in a second. But abandonment happens way more frequently than you would think.
It's
So
kind of
it,
like it's almost like the equivalent to like if you come from e-commerce, the abandoned cart. It's like you add stuff to cart and you go to checkout and then you abandon
mhm.
it. And then in the e-commerce world, you'd get tons of emails saying like, that sweater you're looking at just got, just went on sale or something like that. Um, so it's like the iOS or Android app equivalent of that.
Yeah, it's someone who showed some intent to purchase, but then hesitated. So the way that I would think about these users is that these are all like moderate intent users. They're not the high intent that are purchasing right away, but they're also not people who are trying to abandon the paywall or dismiss the paywall initially. They're showing some intent that they're willing to purchase. They're just hesitating for a moment. And it's not uncommon. And it happens way more than you might think. So, for example, the best high converting paywalls or high converting apps that we see have a 47 to 57% abandonment rate. That means for every checkout that started, 47 to 57% of them are abandoned. And if that feels shocking, it should feel shocking. It was shocking to us when we first discovered this. The rate is crazy high. iOS and Android users abandon transactions constantly. And what we find is that about the best performing iOS apps around this have only about below a 40% abandonment rate. So even the best performing apps still have a huge abandonment uh, issue on their hands.
But basically, a way to think about this is if you have a 10% trial start rate, 20% of the people are clicking that bottom button.
Yeah.
And those people who are abandoning are probably the most interested out of everyone who isn't converting. And that's what all this leverage is.
And what we also find is that it's not unusual for some apps to have 70% or higher abandonment rate. I've seen some that have closer to 90%. It's not uncommon that you have a high abandonment rate. Um, and then on Android, we find that abandonment rate is actually even higher than iOS for the best performing apps. It's about uh, 20 to 30 points higher, which is massive. Cool. I'm seeing some questions come through. Uh, all right. So, Kyle, your question about whether they come back and convert, we're actually going to show you some of that data coming up. Um, Jordan, any other questions that we need to answer right away?
Just mainly wondering if this will be up somewhere where they can access it later, which it will be. I'm not sure
Absolutely.
exactly where, but I'll tweet out the link or something to make sure everybody gets easy access to it.
100%. Also, join our Discord community. We'll post it there.
Another one from an anonymous attendee. Is there a way for us to see what our abandonment rate is now? If you go to
Yes.
charts and then check out conversion, you can see that.
Yep. I'll show you a little more visual of how you can find that in just a second. So one important thing I want to mention is that this behavior affects apps of every scale. So whether you have 300,000 started checkouts or 13,000 or 500, the abandonment rate still happens across every app category. We see fluctuations in the rate, but you can see here some examples from different apps, different scale of how many checkouts were started and how many were abandoned over a 30-day window. So just like Jake said, here's how you find your abandonment rate. So you're going to go to Superwall and charts and then checkout conversion. And then you can take that abandoned checkout total and divide it by your started checkout total. And that'll give you your abandonment rate. We're also going to add an additional line here on this chart in the next few weeks that'll actually show you the rate of abandonment versus your checkout conversion. All right. So here, let's ask this question. So what? Won't these users purchase anyways? Won't they come back? Won't they complete a purchase? Won't they just start another transaction? Turns out, not according to the data that we see. In fact, users who abandon a transaction don't purchase often within the next 30 days. So the percent of abandoned transactions that will result in a future purchase is only 16 to 23%. It's a pretty small range, which means you've got a huge chunk of users who showed some intent to purchase and then abandoned pretty quick. And that is an opportunity for you to show a new type of offer to those users with very low risk of cannibalizing your additional revenue. Cool. So before we get into some tactical things, let's talk about reasons why users just abandon purchase. And I want to ask Jake here, what are your like top 2 or 3 reasons why users abandon a transaction?
I think a lot of times, well, I think two things. One is my intuition is price uncertainty. I think people know that when they tap the button, a payment like an Apple Pay sheet's going to come up, and they just want to see what the actual details are on pricing. So they're interested enough to see what the price is. And I would say the second is I think if you keep iterating on a paywall, sometimes like some dark practices can peek in. And I think a lot of times people just get into tapping sprees or they just want to continue through onboarding. And I think a lot of it could also just be accidental. Um, but yeah, I think the point of this is you're sort of casting a wide net to try to figure out like who are the people who are almost ready to convert and whether people like even though a lot of the people who tap purchase have no intent of converting, it is a signal for some subset of users and you have nothing to lose in trying to win those people over.
Awesome. So basically, to recap everything Jake just said, you've got price sensitivity. So users, once they see the price in the App Store payment sheet, they hesitate. Solution uncertainty. We see this sometimes that users sometimes need to see the product or see more of it with lower risk, especially if you're only offering a short trial or no trial. There's some uncertainty, like Jake mentioned, they're not sure what the actual price is going to be. Maybe they're moving too quickly through user flow. And then sometimes there's poor shady paywall UX. We see this sometimes where a developer will have a very high transaction abandonment rate because they've actually disguised the CTA purchase as just another step in the onboarding flow. And there's a lot of unwanted transaction starts. So that's something that you should fix in the UX. That's not really like a growth tactic, but it does happen for that reason. So what do you do? Glad you asked. What we're going to suggest is that you create a special campaign for these users. So in Superwall, you can easily create a special campaign using the transaction abandonment placement. And we're going to show you some details around how that works and some of the best practices that we see. So first off, let's talk about offer types. So usually when you get to this scenario, you want to present a special offer to this customer and something to add some extra enticement to actually complete a transaction. So Jake, what are some of your favorite types of offers that you have tried that you love going back to time and time again?
So I think it depends mainly on if you offer a free trial or not. If you do offer a free trial, the test I would run is actually removing the free trial from your paywall, and then on the abandonment, give them a free trial. Another option is to give them a longer free trial. So start with 3 days, and if they abandon, give them 7 days. And then there's always just the discount, which is just a cheaper price. Another one that I think is really interesting is, like if you have two products on your paywall, the conversion rate goes up because there's a price for everybody, but sometimes your LTV goes down because people who would have paid for like a yearly plan would choose a monthly or a weekly. And so people don't want to like lose out on those customers. So they end up showing both yearly and monthly or yearly and weekly. But I think a really cool test to run would be to only have yearly in the paywall. And if they abandon, offer weekly or monthly as like, hey, want to make a lower commitment type of thing. And you just got to test all these.
Mm-hmm. So some of the offer types that we find work best, exactly like Jake mentioned, we've got discount offers, so you can offer a long-term discount from your current price, different types of trial offers. So I use this with customers sometimes, just like Jake mentioned, if you're showing a 3-day trial on your main paywall, offer a 7-day trial on your transaction abandonment paywall, or offering a 1 month deep discount. So sometimes we'll see if the annual plan is $70 or $80 for the year, give 30 days for $3 to $6. It's still low risk for you, and then it gives users a longer chance to try it for a very low barrier to entry. And then one thing that I see work particularly well with some of our high volume customers is keeping the trial length the same, but offering a long-term discount. So in this case, if I offer a 3-day trial on my original paywall, I'll continue to show a 3-day trial on my transaction abandoned, but give a discount long-term. And then there's some other options. The fourth group, they don't perform as well, but they're still worth testing. So one might be first year discounts. So you can create a pay upfront introductory offer for your first year and provide a discount. The problem with that is it's usually still a large barrier to entry. So if my price is $60 a year and I offer a discount of 25%, 25% still sounds good until I see that still $45 for the first year. So it's a high sticker price. And because we're specifically targeting users who might be price sensitive, that usually doesn't perform as well. And then there are messaging only designs using urgency or value prop messaging that sometimes work, but not as frequently. All right, before I move on, I'm gonna do a quick Q&A check.
Yeah, Nick, the ones that I have open are ones that I think would be better answered by you.
Cool. What percent typically convert with an abandonment offer in the first use? So that's a really awesome question. Transaction abandonment typically can range in conversion rate from anywhere from 5 to 22% of the total users who enter that campaign. But because you typically either like if you're offering a discount with no trial, that's all direct revenue. So it can have like a high revenue impact, even though my conversion rate might be the same, a little bit lower, a little bit higher than my normal conversion rate for my paywalls. It varies quite a bit, but that's why we test lots of different options because we want to know what's actually going to convert best. Good question, Lauren. Um, all right. All right. Jason, yes, there is a lot going on. Lots of different types of options. Any advice on where the user journey is good? So we're going to talk about that, Ewan, in just a minute, because we don't want to risk cannibalizing our revenue. Totally with you there. How do you measure results? You're not accidentally giving cheaper offers to those who would actually. Okay. The anonymous we're going to talk about that in a second. I want to make sure we get to that question. Um, cool. And then
We'll
Jordan,
get
you
the
can provide a link
Discord.
to the
Yeah.
Discord community. Cool.
Did you see the top one from Fanny? Yes. You might have answered that while I was typing an answer.
Yes, demand score is still something that we haven't. It's still a beta feature that we haven't released to all users. So I'm actually gonna take that one offline. Um, cool.
But it's really cool.
All right. Cool. All right. So let's talk about paywall designs. What works and what doesn't. So the best practice for paywall designs is keep the messaging focused on the offer. I see far too many developers start trying to create transaction abandonment campaigns and focus heavy on features or what they get or what some sort of value prop messaging alone or something. And those just never work as well as clarifying the messaging around the specific offer you're giving these users. So the three designs here that you see are all very good designs that you can use as examples that focus on the messaging. Even the one on the far right, that's one of Jake's apps, it it has some messaging that's personal. It's a message from the developer, but it focuses on the discount. And the discount UI and everything really hones in on that as a special offer. Um, you can use limited time offer messaging or language on your paywall as well, especially if you're only going to show this to them once ever. So if it is actually a one-time offer or a limited time offer, or even a time-based offer, you can include that on the paywall, and that will help increase conversion. You can also use your copy to transition users from the previous paywall. So in the example on the far right, the first headline says, too expensive? I get it. And that's a good way to transition users from the original paywall to this one for one of the key reasons that we think a user might abandon the original purchase, which is price sensitivity. And then you can always consider countdown timers. Um, uh, Jake, I want to ask you, what other things you see on paywalls on transaction abandonment paywalls that you typically like to use, or that you might also suggest as other ways to design that paywall?
So again, I think that there are a few hypotheses for why somebody starts a transaction and then abandons it. And you kind of have, I would design a paywall for each like archetype or for each assumption and run those as tests. So for example, like these are all ones addressing the price uncertainty or either price uncertainty or price sensitivity. Another one to test here, like I think that's the best one to, usually I think that's the one that would work. I think most people, I think of the people who start a transaction and abandon it, you have the highest chances of winning over people who are price sensitive. And you could either fix that with like a discount or a trial. And I do think that the timers work. I think the timers just
Mhm.
do a great job. Because they just create a sense of urgency. You can make it fake, you know, or you can say that it's a one-time offer, like what Cal AI does. So they just like in Superwall, they add a limit to the transaction abandoned to one, and so you'll
Mhm.
only ever see this once. Um, and yeah, I mean, those are the tests I would run. Or
Awesome.
sorry, another one could be um, that the try like inside of the price uncertainty, it's really offer uncertainty. So I think a lot of times people offer a trial, but the customer doesn't realize that even after clicking the purchase button, they just look at the price and click abandon. And so to go from like your normal paywall to an abandoned paywall that maybe even has the same offer, but just shows the trial timeline, I think is another great test to run. Um,
Mm.
you don't have to basically you don't have to assume that it's the price that pricing is the issue. That's just what I think is most likely. You could revert to just trying totally different messaging with the same offer. Like, do you realize this is actually free for 7 days? You have nothing to lose. Or yeah,
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've seen a
what
few
what do you see
cases.
work?
I see. I like big bold messaging around the discount offer
Hmm.
as like a test, but the one that I see work frequently in the design is if I'm like, let's say I have a 3-day trial that I offer on my main paywall, and on my abandonment, I'm going to offer a 7-day trial. I'm really going to focus the messaging around the fact that I'm not just offering 7 days, but I'm giving 4 bonus days to try this product. So I'm extending it for a
Hmm.
whole week. So positioning it not based around the length of the trial, but how much extra time users get will work well. And I think that's a lot of what I think, Jake, is you're getting at here is like massaging the messaging around the offer and
Yeah,
putting it in a positioning around the user experience. So I'm not just getting a discount, I'm getting way more value for the money I'm spending. Or I'm not just getting extended trial, I'm getting 4 bonus days. Or let's say if I offer 7-day trial and I get a 14-day offer, or maybe let's say my original paywall has a 3-day trial, but on my transaction abandoned, I'm going to give them a month for $3. That is a pretty good offer, but you want to massage the messaging around the experience that you're creating a very low barrier to entry. But you should try it for a whole 30 days. And if they don't like it, they can cancel. And you can mention that in the messaging here. And you really want to massage that so that users understand they're not just getting an additional offer, they're actually getting a different way to try the product.
totally.
All right, cool. So let's talk about best practices for setting up campaigns in Superwall. And we're going to focus on targeting and audience filters that we have available for you. So we're going to answer some of those questions in the Q&A in this section. So first things first, Jake mentioned this and I'm going to mention it again. Just start testing. You don't know what works or doesn't work until you put something in front of users. So whether it's discount prices, intro offers, messaging, design, countdown timers, all of that should be tested and you got to start somewhere. So pick 2 variants to start testing at minimum and get going. One interesting, very targeted um, campaign that I see people use is showing an offer to users based on the product they actually abandoned. So in this case, I can create filters using the abandoned product ID parameter to only target offers to people who abandoned a yearly plan. So like let's say I have an A/B test going on and I'm testing my annual plan right now, or I've got a couple different versions in the wild. I can show a specific paywall and offer to users just who abandon annual plan, or let's say weekly plan, or any kind. I can even tailor this based on the type of intro offer that a user had based on the product they abandoned. So that allows you to really hone and get specific because you may not want to offer a transaction abandon to people who started a monthly plan or a weekly plan. You may want to try and convert them later on in the free the freemium user experience. So you can be very tactical here. Another targeting filter that I like to use is presented by event name. And what this allows you to do is be able to target users based on where in the app experience they actually abandoned a paywall. So, and your question about any advice where in the user journey is good, um, it depends. So what I would look at is your abandonment rate, and you can actually segment your abandonment rate based on your current placements. So you can see how many people abandon in onboarding versus abandon later at your other in-app purchases or in-app placements. And you can see how high the abandonment rate is and how many of these users will actually come back and convert at any point. And what I would do is if your onboarding abandonment rate is high, that is where you have the best chance for your transaction abandonment campaigns to convert. That's just my experience. I would find a place where there's a high enough abandonment rate that it's worth it to do. Um, and typically there's pretty real low risk in cannibalizing your um, in your overall revenue because of this, because you can see how many of these users will actually come back and purchase at any other point in the future. One more targeting offer that I want to show you here is you can show a transaction abandoned paywall to users who are only to users who are eligible for an intro offer using the is free trial available placement filter. So that allows you to make sure that you're only showing to users who you can actually provide an intro offer to or a longer trial. And you can actually combine a few of these together to make sure you're targeting a very specific audience. All right. I'll mention this again. There's no one size fits all paywall or offer. So running A/B tests is the best way to make sure that you continue to optimize. I think we at Superwall believe that the apps that run the most experience will learn the fastest, and those that learn the fastest will win. Cool. All right. I want to get to some commonly asked questions, but before we do that, I'm going to check the Q&A here. Cool. We get quite a few questions here. How would you measure results to ensure that you're not accidentally giving cheaper offers to those who were actually prepared to pay the higher amount to start with? Good question. The way that I would do that is I would create a transaction campaign with where you show a discount offer or some other offer to those users versus a paywall that shows the exact same price but changes the messaging and design. And you're going to compare the two to see if the pricing is actually the thing that mattered there or if it was some other aspect of that paywall that caused the user to hesitate.
You could also segment it. You could do something with user.seeds to see if like the seed value is less than 50. So user seeds, anytime a user installs the app or you call configure, we assign a random number to their to the seed attribute in the user attributes. And that number is it stays the same, and you could use it to segment users predictably. And so you can say if the seed is less than 50, show the transaction abandonment. And then you'd have to do this part in your own tool, but in Mixpanel or Amplitude, you'd be able to see like what is the revenue generated based on the user seed to see if it actually definitively made more money for a time period. I think that's the only definitive way to know that you didn't cannibalize sales. But another one is if you use Mixpanel or Amplitude, again, a very easy thing to do is to look at a funnel of paywall close to purchase, meaning you abandoned a paywall, like you did not purchase on a paywall, or even transaction abandoned to purchase, just to see what happens. And you would just use that as an input. So if you're seeing that 10% of people end up purchasing after abandoning, and you lower the price by 50%, then you'd want to see a 20% incremental boost. It just adds a little bit more math for you to figure it out. But yeah, some of the best teams in the world use this, and like they've done the work. And whether or not it works for you, I think is like a you question, but whether or not this is worth testing is like 100% without a doubt the case. Like Cal AI does it, every big customer that we have does some version of this.
While we're on that topic, I'm also going to pitch it. We just introduced some integrations with Mixpanel and Amplitude, and you can also send paywall events directly from the client to those tools as well. So, quick pitch on it's always worthwhile sending your Superwall data to your other product analytics tool. Cool. All right. Let me look through. Okay. I'm gonna get to a couple of these commonly asked questions, then we're gonna go right to Q&A. We got a lot of questions coming up. So one question that we get frequently is, my app gets rejected by Apple during the review process for my transaction abandonment paywall. What are the best practices around this? Should I remove it during app review and then add it back once it's approved? And then, or wait a few releases before adding it back in? So this happens frequently enough. Like most of our customers, like 80 to 90% of the time, you'll get approved with this and there's no problem. We have customers who've run this for years at this point. Occasionally you get an app reviewer that will hit you for something, and everyone's been hit with an app review that for something that either is or is not valid by an app reviewer, or something that's very opinionated or subjective. So Apple tends to be opinionated about this, especially when you're offering a discount offer. So sometimes you can just change the offer that you're presenting to the user and that will get approved. So for example, if I'm changing the offer from, like, let's say I was showing $60 a year with a 3-day trial on my original paywall, and then on the transaction ban I'm showing a $45 price with a 3-day trial. I haven't really changed it. I've just given a discount, and Apple's kind of particular about that. But if I extend it to a 7-day trial, now I'm presenting a different type of offer to that user. So there's lots of different ways to do it. Sometimes it's worth pausing it to get through a review if you're getting a reviewer who's pretty stubborn about it. But you can always appeal, and you can always try to get other variations approved. Cool. Another common question. Users bounce in and out of the cart multiple times before purchasing. I don't want to offer a deal immediately that could cannibalize revenue. So some best practices that we would recommend, sometimes you can delay the transaction abandonment, but I would also recommend putting a limit on it. I don't want to show a transaction abandonment every time someone abandons a purchase. Maybe I want to show it one time ever to users. Maybe I want to actually make it like a one-time offer. I could limit it to once every 30 days so that my users will only ever see a special offer once a month. There's lots of different ways that you can limit. And I'm curious, Jake, do you have any other suggestions here? Oh, you're muted.
From a UX perspective, it could seem a little. Well, okay, yeah. One concern is that you're cannibalizing revenue, and that's just something that you have to test, kind of with what I said before. Um, the other one though is like, if the UX is an issue, you could just leverage the fact that you know that a transaction abandon happened and give them a discount somewhere else. It doesn't have to be right after. Like you can do like you can see the last time when a transaction abandon happened. You could build that as part of an audience, and like maybe if you're building a workout app and you go to start a workout, typically you show normal pricing, but if you see that they've abandoned a transaction in the last 24 hours or 7 days, maybe you give them a discount then. So yeah, you really just have to you have
So
to test out different ways
yeah,
to leverage the information.
that's actually a really cool way to set up a campaign where you don't set up a campaign using the transaction abandoned placement. you actually use one of your normal placements and then add an audience with a filter where the occurrences of transaction abandoned in the last 24 hours or last day, if it's greater than one, you'll show them an offer. If it's so you can we have this new way to filter based on event occurrences. So you can actually say like if they've abandoned a transaction in the last week, I'm going to show a specific discount offer every time this other placement in my app is triggered. Cool. All right, so now we're going to turn back to the open Q&A, and I want to go through this list here. Um, we got an anonymous attendee question. If we have a weekly price right now of $2.99 per week, and they're just early in their paywall experimentation history, would we recommend a cheaper annual price for the transaction ban or just a cheaper weekly price? That's a really good question. And that's one that's kind of hard to test if you're trying to offer discounts. Like it's hard to discount lower than $3. Um, Sometimes you can, if you're promoting a $3 a week plan, that's a really low barrier to entry. That's low cost. If
I
the
would, well,
alternative is a yearly plan, that might be a bigger sticker shock to users. Um,
I
Jake, go
wouldn't
ahead.
show the weekly and then annual right out. Like I wouldn't show the
Yeah.
annual in the transaction abandonment. But um, I think this raises a good question in general, which is what should my pricing be for any paywall? And I think that there's like an order of events for new apps that you should, an order of tests that you should run. The first is you need to quickly, first you need to quickly find out if you have a viable business. So if you're growing organically, then any money coming in is great. But if you're growing with ads, which a lot of you are, you need to make sure that you can support the ad model or the growth model that you're doing. And the easiest way to do that is to like quickly iterate on your messaging. If you have competitors, which I think competitors are a great thing, it's proof that the market exists. Um, I would just, you know, borrow as much as possible. Everyone copies everyone anyway. Borrow as much as possible as you can from your competitors. Um, Use like similar messaging because you have to assume that if they're growing, they're doing something right. After that, though, you'd want to run a bunch of price experiments. So let's say like, the first price that you use, I wouldn't think too much about whether it's like 39, 49, 59, doesn't matter too much. But once you sort of know that you have a viable business on your hands, I would go into like an extensive price test where you test every price that you think would make sense for your customers. And what you might find is like, um, you know, 39.99 is the best. The second best might be 59.99, and the third best might be 29.99. And so in that case, the 59.99 is like it's the second best, but it's more expensive than 39. So you can't really use that as a discount. But I would do something where like if 39.99 is your highest LTV, and like
Mm.
you'd basically want to find the highest LTV product that is cheaper than your winner. And that's what you'd want to use for your abandonment. Um, and I like to think of it as like a pricing timeline in general. Like you have all these SKUs that you've tested and you sort them in descending LTV order, and then you remove the ones that are higher than anyone before it. And then you have this like nice timeline of like these are the best price points to offer people. And whenever you see a transaction abandoned, or if you see somebody coming back after a week, or if you see like someone using the product a lot, they've seen the paywall a bunch, but they're not converting, you just kind of shift them over to the next price in the timeline. Um, Long-winded answer, but that's kind of the order of events that I would go about.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that the point there, whoever posted this, is that if you're still early on transaction abandonment, you don't need to jump to that right away. Start with a lot of price testing and figure out what's the optimal price for your product first. It's going to support your model and then build in transaction abandoned.
And also, just so everyone else sees too, I'm recapping all of this in a blog post that'll go live pretty shortly afterwards, and a lot of these Q&As will show up on that too. So if you need a reference, and again, you'll have a chance to do that.
Cool. All right, next question. How do you think about transaction abandonment in the context of a freemium app? So in context of freemium, it really depends on how much your conversions come from post onboarding. there are some apps where they're getting the same or more conversions from their in-app placements as they are in onboarding. In that case, that's maybe a signal that my transaction bandit needs to not be in onboarding because I'm having an opportunity to convert them later on at the full price. If my in-app purchase conversion rate is low, significantly lower than my onboarding, then I think there's less risk in putting it transaction abandon campaign right after onboarding.
So premium, if like remember the reasons why people abandon transactions. One of them is price uncertainty, and another one is product uncertainty. Now, having a freemium experience is actually a built-in way of addressing people that have product uncertainty, meaning they're not willing to buy it now. So you give them part of your app away for free and they can try it out and maybe you'll convince them down the road. So the more you offer for free, the more you have to be worried about cannibalizing future transactions because you already have a built-in method of convincing people later on. If your app has a hard paywall though, which to be honest, I recommend a lot of the people starting out, I recommend that you have a hard paywall. Then it's a very low chance that you're cannibalizing anything because
Mm.
if they can't use the app, then why would they come back and see the paywall again anyway? Um, and yeah, the reason I think early apps should have a hard paywall is because um, in the early days, your biggest risk of running your app is that you're going to waste a ton of time building something that you shouldn't even be working on, and that like sometimes you need to know if you should iterate or maybe change what you're building to service a broader user segment, or maybe fix your solution to a problem that you know exists. And by putting out like a hard paywall in there, it's forcing customers to make a decision, and it'll just let you gather really quickly on if you're building the right thing and if you have a viable business. Then once you know the answer is, true, yes, then you can start adding freemium features. And to put this into perspective, like Cal AI is doing 3 million plus a month, and they only just started thinking about freemium. Like you can really take it far with a hard paywall. And there's just some clarity and something nice about knowing that every single user that's in your app is paid to be there. Like they are fully on board. You're not wasting your time with support or like answering, you know, you're not wasting time catering to the concerns of people who aren't even willing to pay you, which is really, really confusing early on.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of my thoughts there.
Mm. All right. Cool. Next question. For transaction abandon, would you do a one-time offer that is a really low price and then do a second transaction abandon offer that's different? Because if they don't convert on the one-time offer, what's the best way to still get them to convert? See, Jake, you want to take that one first?
Sure. Um, so this is like a double transaction abandon. I don't even think the SDK would allow it. Like if you abandon transaction on a transaction abandon paywall, it doesn't show you another transaction abandon. Um,
I think maybe let's use the example where like they maybe offer um, they don't convert on transaction abandon and then they go back into the app and then see a normal price. I think in that case, you're that's kind of the point of making it like a one-time offer and using messaging that this is going to be presented once. Um,
yeah, I'm a little
and
confused by the
if
question.
yeah, maybe we can get some clarification from whoever posted that. All right, cool. Um, Aylin, you said I can see we have a 48% abandonment rate in our app. Can I see what percentage of these will later convert? So one way to do this is pretty straightforward is use mixed panel or amplitude, like Jake mentioned in the example earlier. Another way that I'll sometimes look at it is I'll use my window. Um, like I'll use like the chart window and change the date range to look at, for example, 37 days to 7 days ago and see how my abandonment rate changes, or I'll look at it, I'll change it to 30 to 60 days ago and look at how that window fluctuates and how it changes to get a gauge on how whether those users will actually come back and complete a transaction, or how my transaction abandonment rate changes over time based on those different windows. That's one.
We
That's sort
should
of a
add
loose
this
way to
as a
do it.
chart. We
Yeah, I
should
think
add like
so.
a we don't have the ability to do like funnels yet in the charts, but once we do, we'll add a transaction abandoned purchase, and then you'd be able to segment that by the campaign, and you'd know if from like a regular placement, if like what percentage of abandonments would convert. But like Nick said, generally it's around like I would say it's like 10% max. And it's over a long period of time. It's not
Got it.
immediate, you know. And by the way, that's another thing. Like maybe maybe 15% for some apps would have converted anyway later on. But that might take, 2 months, and maybe it's worth taking a 10% haircut even to have that revenue up front.
Totally. All right.
I was typing out the answer. Was that in response to the topmost question about
Yes,
the
Yes.
yes.
okay. Was the long story short 10% ballpark?
It's like what do you
If
say?
we
It
had
was
to
like
generalize.
I would say like
I
20%
think,
max.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
that's
Thank you.
like the
If your app is
best.
super premium, and
Yes.
like people really have a reason to come back. You like
Yep.
strong retention, and yeah. That means that if 10% purchase on their first paywall view, it'll eventually reach 12%, something like that.
Hmm. Cool. All right. Kayla that's an awesome question. Do you have any insights on how different age groups react to these practices, and would any advice for older user bases?
Older users have a lot
I,
more money.
yeah, I was gonna say they typically have more disposable income. I might, I might not show it on the first three paywall views. I might wait a little bit longer if they're in an older age demographic before I ever present a transaction abandoned. Um, Younger
I think,
demographic, I think I would
yeah,
lean more towards longer trials.
really, I would, so I think younger people have less money, but they're more willing to start a trial because they feel comfortable canceling. Like they'll cancel immediately. They're savvy. Older people, they do have the money to spend, but the trials work less on them because they just have subscription fatigue. Like they've just been screwed all the time with these subscriptions that they don't know how to cancel, and they're actually very skeptical of starting trials. Um, so I would, for older people, I would just give them a quick discount. I think that it's just more about the money for them, even though they have more money. Um, but I think that's a great segment to test on.
Hmm.
And for younger users, um, well, sorry, for older users, what would be very interesting, like I would say an interesting test to run if you have this data, is like offer them a trial, and then in the abandonment, give them the same offer, but let them set a reminder on when their trial ends. And you could do the reminder in the Superwall editor. Um, yeah, I think that would be a really interesting test to run. But the real answer, just overarchingly, is your age definitely has like is correlated to LTV. So just run tests separately on the different age groups.
Cool. Thanks, Jake. Anna or Anch asks a really good question. Would we recommend using surveys to find out the reason why users are abandoning, and then using the data to show a specific abandonment paywall? So we have surveys built into Superwall, but they're based on a paywall decline. So we should actually just build a paywall template that's user transaction bin that includes a survey up front, and then based on the response, takes them to a specific offer in one like cohesive paywall. We'll work on that because I think that would be that'd be really helpful to have you get some insights and then your users would get a tailored offer to them. That would be cool one to run. So, and we'll work on a template that'll include that for you that you can use on transaction abandon. The second question is it possible to send a user to different campaigns based on the survey option they selected? I would keep that in the same design. Like you can build the logic in using a navigation element or on the first page of that flow, you ask the question, and then based on the response, you take them to a specific page with
So
a specific offer.
not to use the native survey feature, just to have a paywall that shows 4 buttons. They can click
Yep.
one, and then depending on that, takes them to a different page.
Yep. That's what I would do.
I think
Because
that's genius.
the native surveys only work for paywall decline, not transaction abandon. Cool. We'll work on a template that includes that. Cool.
Also, Nick, I'll jump in real quick.
Sure.
I'm sure others are wondering this as well. If you just want like the shortest possible explanation of how to set this up yourself, go to the Q&A, go to answered, and at the very bottom where Jesse asks, like, is there a blog post for this? I link to a quick guide. So there's a video too. You can get it running in less than a minute. Very, very easy to do in Superwall.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Let me see. I want to make sure we trim. Verum asked, can we also target based on day 1, day 2, day 3? Yes, you can absolutely target them based on time since app install. So you can make sure that you're only showing 2 users based on whatever criteria you want. We've got a bunch of filters that are time-based. Cool. And then, okay, I want to make sure I answer all the transaction abandoned campaigns before we get to more general product ones. Can you show? Lauren asked a question, can you show us how we would set up so the user only sees it one time? So Jordan, I think you can probably link to the docs here about how to set limits on paywall views. So Lauren will get you that answer. What is a good technical way to chase users with an abandoned checkout via email? And do you have email campaign tips? I think Jake's the master of this. Jake has done several of these campaigns using email.
So a lot of people have push notifications set up for their emails. And if you have their email already, if you use a tool like customer.io or any other, messaging, event-driven messaging platform, and what that means is like analytic, like a message, like an analytic event comes in, and then you have some criteria, and then a message gets sent if they meet that criteria. And so, yeah, what I did back in the day for Fitness AI was anytime you saw the paywall, people would just get an email from me. And if they had push turned on, they would get it pretty instantly. And like as they're looking at the paywall, they would see like a message, like an email from Fitness AI coming in. And it was just a very personal message saying, hey, I'm Jake. I'm the CEO of this company that I started. And I'd love to, I noticed you were downloading. I noticed you downloaded the app, and I'd love to give you a discount. And yeah, so you can definitely do that based off transaction abandon. What you would do is like in the code in the Superwall delegate, you can tell if an event was triggered by the SDK. And if you see that it's a transaction abandon, just forward that event to customer IO or Braze or Iterable, and then make a campaign in that platform to send an email when that happens. I mean, you could forward along all the parameters, like if there's a trial available and all that stuff, that's all built into the trial abandon placement. So you'd be able to make any decision you want there. It's a great idea, especially if you're worried about cannibalizing too much of the sales. But you have to live with the fact that someone may pay higher in app and then later see an email that they got a discount. It might be a point of frustration for them.
Cool. We're getting to more general product questions now. Um, so let's talk through a handful of these. Um, so one of the questions, there's a couple questions about like paywall impact on trial conversion rate or trial cancel rate. So Josie asked a question, we're seeing an increase in our trial cancellation rate. Is there a way to retarget these users? So yes, we do have. Jake, did the new subscription filters go live yet?
Not yet, but it's like pending for the next release.
Yes, cool. So our next release, we're going to give you filters to be able to target users who are either like in an active trial and active subscription or a canceled trial or an
Or
expired
expired.
trial,
Yep.
expired subscription, and be able to show them a specific offer to those users. So you can use your same campaigns that you have, you'll just create additional audiences using those filters. Um, there's one other question asked that's uh, adjacent to this. Do you think the paywall has any impact on how many people convert from free trial to a paid user? I've oh the that went to
Sorry,
screen
man,
before I
I
finished.
jumped the gun. It's if
Oh,
you go to answer and scroll down, it'll be at the bottom.
cool. I've seen people talking about Blinkist paywall has an impact on free trial to paid user. Cool. So short answer is yes. We do see that the paywall design has a big impact on whether or not users convert from trial to paid. And there's a few ways that this happens. So we're big fans of multi-page paywalls at Superwall. We see this work over and over again, that the breaking out your messaging on your paywall into a few pages, like usually 3, max 4, will lead to higher conversions. And what you do is you simplify the messaging on there. And one of those pages should be one telling users that you're going to send them a reminder before the trial ends, which you can do through Superwall. And you can set that delay to be 2 days before the trial expires, let's say. But telling them that you're going to send a reminder reduces their anxiety about having to make sure they're not accidentally charged. So they'll actually, it reduces the number of cancellations on the first day of subscription. So being upfront and actually following through and sending them a reminder leads to a higher trial to paid conversion rate, because you're being upfront and transparent about the fact that you're going to send a reminder and that those users will actually be more likely to convert, but your trial to paid conversion rate will go up as well, because they're actually giving it an honest shot um, during their trial period instead of proactively canceling right away to make sure they're not charged and then forgetting to actually subscribe later. Um, so your design can have a big impact on whether or not people convert from trial to paid. Totally. Um, the other thing that we see will also increase trial to paid is plenty of paywalls list out their features in a set of bullet points. And we've seen time and time again, if you can make those bullet points visual, so either create like a modern carousel that uses an image of the part of the product experience related to each of those bullets and keep the copy very light, where you're previewing what they're going to get in the app and then actually delivering on that in the core app experience. It's kind of like the way your app store screenshots work, where you're showing parts of the product and how it's going to be used. You can actually use that in a carousel on your paywall, and that will also lead to a couple percentage point bump in your child to paid conversion rate. Cool. All right. Questions keep coming in. Jason, you asked whether or not psychology would tell in the heat of the moment if you'll get more fear of loss than if you wait for someone to come back. I think A/B testing is really the only way. A/B testing or some sort of user survey, and we'll build a template for that. But I think paywalls are the least intuitive part of app design, and the reasons people cancel typically fall in the categories we mentioned, but it's hard to predict that all the time. So A/B testing is really the only way to know. Um, cool. Um, do multi-page paywalls work well with paywall for paywalls without trials? Yeah, I think multi-page trails work well with any of them. Multi-page trails just allow you to break out your messaging. So if you can show the product a little more visually, you can guide users through presenting them what they're going to get versus telling them. So you can make it a lot more visual. You can break up your messaging much easier. It probably isn't as effective as if you include trials, but it's still worth testing. Absolutely. Um, so cool. Ilya asked a question that I'm gonna let you take, Jake. Uh, says, I can't understand the difference between Superwall and Revenue Cat. In this keynote, I see some good features which RC doesn't have, but it seemed like I have to redo a lot in my code. Actually, we have a lot of customers who use Superwall and Revenue Cat in conjunction with each other, and there's not a lot of code refactoring when that happens. But Jake, you want to take the paint?
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, so basically, when we started Superwall, we just decided to focus on paywalls and A/B testing, and we have like a huge head start in that area. So anything relating to like running experiments, actually editing the paywalls, being able to run like, three-way tests, four-way tests, segment customers, anything relating to like getting analytics and administering the experiment and editing the actual paywalls, Superwall is just better at. And for a lot of like our biggest customers, we're the only option that they have in the market right now. And then recently, and then to take a step back, the way what Revenue Cat started to solve was they tried to make it really easy to add subscriptions to your apps. And they did. They succeeded. It becomes, they made it exceedingly easier to add subscriptions as back then, and less so now because StoreKit 2 exists and the APIs have just gotten better. And so on the Superwall side, we then went into revenue tracking and subscription management, and analytics, revenue analytics. And I think that we're doing a pretty good job at it, but we're still a little bit behind Revenue Cat in that regard. The same way Revenue Cat, I think, is behind in the paywall stuff. So we kind of do the same thing now, but we have different areas of focus. And for all of our biggest, like we have a lot of huge customers that use us both, and they're just happy with the two services. And we're friendly with them, and we love Revenue Cat. We love everything that they did for the industry. So we always recommend them if if you need something out of Superwall that you can't get, like we're the first to recommend that you use Revenue Cat in conjunction with it. But yeah, I mean, both of us are just eating up the value chain and trying to be as helpful as possible. And it really depends what you would like more. Like if you're in more of a growth phase, you'll get more out of Superwall. And if you just like really want to support like iOS and Android and have subscription statuses sync between different platforms, then I would say use Revenue Cat as well. But I will say with all the confidence in the world that our paywall editor and our testing experience is just years ahead of anything that anyone else has.
And Jake, I'll add on from like the smaller indie developer perspective. A lot of what Jake said is kind of how I answered the question. Revenue Cat started with let's make subscriptions platform really easy, and we started with let's make paywall testing extremely easy. And so we started from different starting points. But also, if you think about it from a technical perspective, Revenue Cat recently with their paywalls is kind of like, here, you can build the paywall, you can trigger it. Where it really helps to think of Superwall, like Jake said, is an easy way to test. Like with Superwall, you don't explicitly just go, hey, show this paywall, though you trigger them with placements, like touch points in your app where you think that you could convert someone or a pro action, things like that. So it's really kind of abstracts the whole, I've got to go manually present this paywall, when do I need to do it, away from you. And it's just a one-line call in our SDK, like Superwall shared, registered, finished onboarding or tapped log caffeine, whatever it is, and we'll show the paywall to handle it. And so everything inherently is an experiment that's set up for you. So there's no process of like going into the dashboard, really creating this big new experiment, putting it live and running it. It's just you're kind of set up to experiment right when you integrate the SDK. So like if you had a campaign and you added another paywall to it, then you just allocate traffic and boom, you're running an experiment already. So It allows you to get answers super quickly. And of course, if you ever have implementation dev questions, anybody here can always DM me on Twitter. And then Duncan, our support engineer, is really great at the technical stuff, which you can always reach us at support@superwall.com too.
Yep. So we are 8 minutes over at this point. I know a bunch of us have to run and some people are already leaving the meeting. We have a few questions here that are still need to be asked. So Johnny, you got some general questions about using Superwall. My biggest advice to you is join the Discord community. We can ask other people in the Superwall community world, but also we can follow up there with you. Someone asked about Apple emails and whether or not you can send them. That's privacy policy and legal question that I think Jake's answering right now.
There's a 99% chance you get away with it. Don't sweat it.
Yeah. And Varun asked if we are introducing onboarding builder alongside the payroll builder for different types of A/B testing. Short answer is yes, 100%. We're really excited about it. I've been stoked about this for a long time. We're building onboarding for experiment. Onboarding is the hardest part of the app experience to experiment on. If I want to go from 5 screens to 12 screens or move my paywall before account registration or after, that's really complex to do. So we're going to aim to make that really simple. The same way you A/B test paywalls right now, we're going to make it just as easy to A/B test onboarding flows. And we have some of those features already. If you've ever used the navigation element in Superwall, it allows you to create a user flow that works, that guides users through several steps. You can add that. We've actually had customers add like 36 steps to that in their navigation element flow, and it still performs really well. So we're going to add a lot more features that you expect out of onboarding, including like native permission prompts. But we'll get to those in the next coming months. That's a big focus for us over the next quarter. Cool.
There's an AppsFlyer integration question that I'm about to hit answer
Cool.
on, but yeah, we're doing all the MMPs. So
Yeah.
AppsFlyer adjust to start, Singular later on. There is an SDK update where you'd have to send us the AppsFlyer ID or the platform specific identifiers that they give you, and then you send that to us. And then if the user purchases or subscribes and renews in the future, then we'll send all those revenue events to those MMPs. Cool,
All right,
guys.
everyone. Thank you so much for the time, everybody. We appreciate it. We're really stoked that you joined us today, and keep an eye out for the next growth session. It'll happen in about a month. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Take care.